Ever wondered what life was really like behind those massive castle walls? Did people actually throw their waste out of windows? Were medieval feasts as extravagant as movies make them seem? Number 15, was privacy even a thing? Privacy in medieval castles, almost non-existent. While nobles might have their own chambers, these rooms weren't exactly private sanctuaries. Servants, attendants, and even visitors routinely entered without announcement. The lord and lady of the castle often slept in the same room where they entertained important guests during the day. Their bed, typically a massive four-poster, served as both sleeping quarters and a status symbol, often costing more than any other piece of furniture in the castle. Even more surprising, the lord and lady rarely slept alone. Personal servants typically slept on small pallets at the foot of their master's bed, ready to attend to needs at any hour. For added warmth and security, trusted servants or family members might even share the massive bed with the lord and lady. Children slept in the same room as parents until they were old enough to serve as pages or ladies in waiting, usually around age 7. For those lower on the social ladder, privacy was even more scarce. Knights, squires, and male servants often slept in the Great Hall on portable beds or simple mats. These would be rolled up during the day when the hall served for meals and castle business. Female servants typically shared cramped quarters, sometimes with 3 or 4 women using a single small room. The constant presence of others wasn't considered an invasion of privacy, it was normal and expected. The modern concept of needing alone time would have seemed utterly foreign to medieval castle dwellers, who found safety and comfort in numbers. Number 14, did they just freeze in winter? Those massive stone walls that look so impressive. They were absolutely terrible at retaining heat. During winter months, castles became nearly as cold inside as outside. Stone walls actually absorbed cold and radiated it inward, turning castles into what were essentially sophisticated refrigerators. To combat the bitter cold, medieval castle dwellers employed surprisingly creative heating methods. Fireplaces were the primary source of warmth, but not in the way we might imagine. Early castles had central hearths with smoke venting through holes in the ceiling. Later designs featured wall fireplaces with chimneys, a major architectural innovation. However, these fireplaces were remarkably inefficient, with much of their heat going straight up the chimney. Castle inhabitants would crowd near these heat sources, with proximity determined strictly by social rank. The lord and lady sat closest to the fire, while servants and lower-ranking individuals huddled farther away. Rooms without fireplaces remained frigid, which is why most activities centered around heated spaces. Tapestries, often depicted as merely decorative in modern portrayals, served a crucial practical purpose by providing insulation against cold stone walls. Similarly, bed curtains weren't just for privacy, they created a microclimate around sleepers. Body heat from multiple people sharing a bed provided additional warmth. People wore layered clothing indoors, including caps and even gloves during the coldest months. Fur-lined cloaks served as portable blankets. Hot drinks and alcoholic beverages provided internal warming. Despite these measures, chilblains, painful inflammation of small blood vessels due to cold, were common, and winter months saw increased illness and mortality, especially among the elderly and very young. Number 13, how bad did medieval castles really smell? Let's be blunt, the odor situation in medieval castles would overwhelm modern noses. But here's the surprising part, castle dwellers weren't just wallowing in filth as pop culture often suggests. They had systems, albeit primitive ones. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people didn't simply toss waste out windows indiscriminately. Castle designers incorporated garderobes, primitive toilets consisting of small rooms with stone or wooden seats positioned over vertical shafts. These shafts led to moats, cesspits, or in some cases, directly outside castle walls. The word garderobe, literally guarding robes, came from the practice of hanging clothing near these toilets, as the ammonia fumes from waste helped repel insects from fabrics. While effective for solid waste, the disposal of other refuse created persistent odor problems. Food scraps, although often fed to castle dogs or pigs, still accumulated. Kitchens produced strong cooking smells that permeated throughout the castle. Tallow candles made from animal fat emitted a distinctly unpleasant odor as they burned. Personal hygiene wasn't entirely neglected, though standards differed dramatically from modern practices. Contrary to common belief, medieval nobility did bathes, though not daily. Bathing required significant effort, heating water, filling tubs, and often creating makeshift privacy screens. Servants used herbs like lavender, rosemary, and thyme in bath water, which helped mask body odor between infrequent baths. Perfumes and pomanders, scented materials carried in decorative containers, helped combat body odor among the wealthy. Rushes, dried plants, covered castle floors, often mixed with herbs to release pleasant scents when walked upon. These would be replaced periodically when they became too soiled or foul-smelling. Number 12, was castle food really that bland and boring? Medieval castle cuisine would actually shock modern diners, not for its blandness, but for its surprising complexity and intense flavors. Forget the dull, unseasoned meat stereotype. Medieval nobles enjoyed remarkably sophisticated dishes heavily spiced with exotic ingredients. Spices like saffron, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and pepper were incredibly expensive, imported from distant lands via dangerous trade routes. Their presence on the table demonstrated wealth and status. Castle cooks used these spices with remarkable abandon, creating flavor combinations that would overwhelm modern palates accustomed to more subtle seasoning. Medieval cooks relied on contrasting flavors within a single dish. Sweet and savory combinations were particularly prized, with meat dishes often featuring fruit, honey, or sweet wine sauces. Almond milk made by grinding almonds with water served as a staple ingredient during fasting periods when animal products were forbidden. The wealthiest castles employed specialized cooks capable of creating subtleties, elaborate showpiece foods designed to impress guests. These might include pastry castles with marzipan inhabitants, roasted peacocks redressed in their own feathers, or pies containing live birds that flew out when cut open. Castle meals followed strict hierarchical arrangements. The lord and his most important guests dined at the high table, eating the finest portions served on valuable dishes. Lower-ranking individuals sat at tables arranged perpendicular to the high table, with food quality and presentation diminishing with distance from the lord. Servants ate simpler fare, often taking what remained after their superiors finished. Interestingly, medieval castle dwellers rarely consumed vegetables, considering them peasant food suitable only for the lower classes. Fruits were more acceptable, particularly exotic varieties that demonstrated wealth. Bread, however, crossed all social boundaries, though its quality varied dramatically by social station. Refined white bread for nobility, coarse dark bread for servants. Number 11, did they really drink alcohol instead of water? The prevalent belief that medieval people drank alcohol exclusively because water was unsafe contains both truth and misconception. Castle inhabitants did indeed consume remarkable quantities of alcoholic beverages, but not solely due to water safety concerns. Castle water sources varied significantly in quality. Many castles featured wells within their walls, providing relatively clean water. Others collected rainwater in cisterns. Springs and streams near castles often provided potable water. However, water quality remained inconsistent and unpredictable. Without understanding microbiological contamination, medieval people judged water safety primarily by taste, clarity, and reputation of the source. Alcoholic beverages provided a safer alternative with a crucial difference from modern drinks, significantly lower alcohol content. Medieval ale typically contained only 1 to 3% alcohol, compared to modern beer averaging 4 to 6%. This small beer or small ale served as everyday hydration, even for children. The brewing process killed harmful microorganisms, making these lightly alcoholic drinks safer than questionable water sources. Wine consumption followed strict social hierarchies. The lord and high-ranking guests enjoyed imported wines, while lesser individuals drank local varieties of varying quality. By conservative estimates, a typical castle nobleman might consume a gallon of alcoholic beverages daily without experiencing significant intoxication, given the lower alcohol content and consumption throughout the day. Milk rarely appeared as a beverage for adults, considered primarily as children's food or for the elderly or ill. Most milk went into cheese production, an important preservation method. Interestingly, medieval medical theory classified drinks by their presumed effect on the body's humors, with different beverages prescribed for different constitutions and health conditions. Number 10. How dark were those castle nights? When the sun set, medieval castles plunged into a darkness few modern people have experienced. Without electrical lighting, castle inhabitants navigated a world illuminated only by flame, creating not just practical challenges but profound psychological effects on daily life. Tallow candles made from rendered animal fat provided the most common lighting source for all but the wealthiest castle inhabitants. These candles produced dim, yellowish light along with significant smoke and an unpleasant odor. Beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter with a honey-like scent, remained prohibitively expensive for all but the nobility. A single beeswax candle could cost as much as a day's wages for a skilled craftsman. Rushlight's dried reeds soaked in animal fat offered an even cheaper alternative, though they burned for only about 15 to 30 minutes. Oil lamps using olive or fish oil provided somewhat better illumination but remained expensive and smoky. Torches, while providing stronger light, created dangerous fire hazards inside castle walls and were generally reserved for outdoor use or special occasions. The scarcity and expense of artificial lighting profoundly shaped castle routines. Most inhabitants rose with the sun and retired shortly after sunset, maximizing daylight hours. Evening activities clustered around limited light sources, with people gathering near fireplaces or shared candles. This necessity for physical proximity reinforced social bonds but limited privacy. Navigating castle passages after dark proved genuinely perilous. Servants responsible for night movements often memorized step counts between locations to avoid injuries from unseen obstacles. Night guards carried lanterns with shutters that could be partially opened to check surroundings without fully compromising night vision. Darkness held spiritual and psychological dimensions beyond mere inconvenience. Medieval people commonly associated night with supernatural dangers, from mundane threats like thieves to spiritual perils like demons. Many castle inhabitants recited specific prayers before sleeping, seeking divine protection during vulnerable nighttime hours. Number 9. How did they handle medical emergencies? When illness or injury struck inside castle walls, treatment methods ranged from surprisingly effective to outright dangerous. Medieval castle medicine operated within a complex framework balancing practical experience, religious beliefs, and theoretical systems now known to be fundamentally flawed. Most castles lacked dedicated medical practitioners. Instead, they relied on a hierarchy of caregivers with varying expertise. Castle ladies typically possessed extensive knowledge of herbal remedies, functioning as primary healthcare providers for household members. Monasteries near castles sometimes provided access to monk physicians who combined practical medical knowledge with spiritual care. For serious conditions affecting important individuals, castles might summon university-trained physicians. These medical professionals, educated in ancient Greek and Arabic medical texts, practiced medicine based on the theory of four bodily humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They believed illness resulted from humoral imbalance, leading to treatments like bloodletting, purging, and carefully regulated diets to restore equilibrium. Surprisingly effective treatments existed alongside harmful practices. Willow bark containing salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, effectively reduced pain and fever. Honey applied to wounds provided antimicrobial properties. Some herbal preparations contained genuine medicinal compounds. However, treatments like mercury for skin conditions or trepanation, drilling holes in the skull, likely caused more harm than benefit. Surgery represented a particularly dangerous medical intervention, performed by barber surgeons rather than physicians. Without effective anesthesia beyond alcohol or opium derivatives, and without understanding infection, surgical procedures carried extreme risks. Amputation, one of the most common operations, had mortality rates exceeding 50% due to blood loss and infection. Religious elements permeated all aspects of castle medicine. Prayer, pilgrimages to healing shrines, and appeals to patron saints of various ailments constituted legitimate medical interventions in medieval thinking. Many castles maintained collections of relics believed to possess healing properties. Number 8. Were children's lives as harsh as we think? Childhood in medieval castles defies simple categorization. Neither the romanticized fairy tale existence nor the uniformly brutal experience modern people might imagine. Castle children navigated a world that acknowledged their vulnerability while preparing them remarkably early for adult responsibilities. For noble children, infancy often involved minimal parental contact. Wet nurses, typically women from surrounding villages who had recently given birth, provided breastfeeding. This practice reflected both medical theories about maternal recovery after childbirth and social expectations for noblewomen, who needed to resume duties quickly. Despite this physical separation, evidence from letters and household accounts suggests genuine parental affection and concern. Children's clothing mirrored adult styles by age 7, physically marking the transition from early childhood to a period of intensified training for adult roles. Castle boys at this age typically began formal education, either from castle chaplains or, for the highest nobility, by leaving home to serve as pages in other castles. Girls remained home longer, learning household management, basic medicine, textile production, and sometimes reading from their mothers or other female relatives. Playtime wasn't entirely sacrificed to practical education. Archaeological discoveries reveal medieval children played with miniature knights, dollhouses resembling castles, wooden animals, balls, and simple board games. However, these toys often doubled as educational tools, preparing children for future responsibilities through play. Discipline combined physical punishment with moral instruction. Medieval child-rearing manuals advised moderation in physical correction, not from concern about psychological impact, but from fear excessive beatings might make children dull-witted or rebellious. Educational texts often included vivid illustrations of consequences for misbehavior, appealing to children's fear rather than reasoning capacity. Perhaps most jarring to modern sensibilities, medieval castle society considered childhood remarkably brief. By age 14, noble boys might serve as squires in military campaigns, potentially experiencing combat. Girls could be betrothed or married as young as 12, though marriages were often not consummated until they were older. Yet despite these adult responsibilities, medieval people recognized adolescence as a distinct life stage requiring guidance and continued development. Number 7. How did they pass the time without modern entertainment? Without television, internet, or even books for most castle inhabitants, medieval entertainment relied on social interaction, physical activity, and oral traditions that modern people might find surprisingly engaging and complex. Storytelling occupied central importance in castle entertainment. Professional storytellers, traveling minstrels, troubadours, and jongleurs brought news, legends, and epic tales to castle halls. These performers combined narrative skills with music, sometimes rudimentary visual aids and theatrical techniques. Their performances served multiple functions: entertainment, news distribution, political commentary often disguised as historical or fictional narratives, and cultural preservation. For the literate minority, reading provided entertainment, though books remained prohibitively expensive. A single volume might cost as much as a small farm, making book collections powerful status symbols. Castle libraries typically contained religious texts, practical manuals on topics like hunting or estate management, and increasingly, romance literature that gained popularity among noble ladies. Games occupied significant leisure time. Chess, introduced to Europe through contact with the Islamic world, served as both entertainment and strategic training, particularly popular among knights and nobles. Dice games, despite periodic religious condemnation as gambling, remained ubiquitous across all social classes. Outdoor games included early versions of bowling, handball, and various ball and stick precursors to modern sports. Music permeated castle life beyond formal entertainment. Work songs accompanied repetitive tasks, making labor more bearable while maintaining work rhythm. Dance provided both exercise and social interaction, with complex formations allowing controlled contact between men and women under public scrutiny. Hunting transcended mere recreation, combining practical food acquisition with social ritual and military training. Falconry, particularly prestigious, required months of specialized training for both birds and handlers. Hunting expeditions reinforced social hierarchies, with participants assigned roles based on their status. Feasts and festivals punctuated the calendar, providing breaks from routine while reinforcing social cohesion. These celebrations combined religious observance, seasonal recognition, and community bonding through shared food, drink, and entertainment. Some festivals temporarily suspended normal social rules, allowing cathartic release from everyday pressures. Number 6. Did castle inhabitants ever bathe? Contrary to popular misconception, medieval castle dwellers weren't uniformly filthy. Their hygiene practices, while different from modern standards, followed logical patterns based on available resources, medical beliefs, and social expectations. Bathing frequency varied significantly by social class, season, and individual preference. Contrary to persistent myths about annual baths, evidence from castle household accounts shows regular bathing among the nobility. The 14th century French noblewoman Jeanne d'Evreux bathed weekly according to her household records, far from modern daily bathing, but hardly the perpetual filth often depicted in popular culture. Full immersion baths presented significant practical challenges in castle environments. Servants needed to heat and transport numerous water containers to fill wooden tubs, typically placed near fireplaces for warmth. Privacy screens of fabric created temporary bathing enclosures in chambers or great halls. These logistical complications made full baths occasional rather than daily events. Between full baths, castle inhabitants practiced regular hand and face washing. Ewers, pitchers, and basins for hand washing appeared at mealtimes, with servants pouring water over diners' hands before and after eating. This practice combined hygiene with ritual significance, particularly important since medieval dining involved handling food directly. Castle inhabitants understood the connection between cleanliness and health, though their explanations differed from modern germ theory. Medieval medical texts recommended bathing for specific health conditions and cautioned against it for others, based on theories about opening and closing the body's pores. Some physicians warned against excessive bathing, believing it weakened the body, a view that influenced bathing frequency among the educated nobility. Public bathhouses existed in medieval towns, though castle inhabitants typically bathed privately. These establishments combined bathing with social gathering, sometimes including food, drink, and even entertainment. However, periodic disease outbreaks sometimes led authorities to close public baths, reinforcing associations between bathing and illness that complicated medieval hygiene practices. Interestingly, knights returning from Middle Eastern crusades brought back more elaborate bathing customs influenced by Islamic hygiene practices, temporarily increasing bathing frequency among European nobility before the Black Death reversed this trend in the 14th century. Number 5. Was communication as limited as we think? Without telephones or internet, castle communication systems seem primitively limited to modern observers. However, medieval castles developed surprisingly sophisticated networks for transmitting information across distances and between social strata. Literacy rates varied dramatically by social class and gender. Among the nobility, male literacy increased steadily throughout the medieval period, with many lords able to read by the later Middle Ages, though writing remained a specialized skill often delegated to scribes. Female literacy, particularly among noble ladies, grew significantly from the 12th century onward, with many high-born women not only reading but also writing correspondence and managing household accounts. Letters provided crucial communication between castles and with the broader world. Professional messengers carried correspondence, often traveling 20 to 30 miles daily on horseback. These messengers operated within complex networks, with letters passing through multiple hands on longer journeys. For particularly sensitive information, oral messages memorized by trusted servants prevented interception. Visual signals enabled rapid communication across distances. Castle watchtowers maintained constant observation, with systems of flags during daylight and fire beacons at night conveying pre-arranged messages. These visual signals followed standardized codes, different numbers or arrangements of flags or fires representing specific messages such as approaching enemies or important visitors. Sound signals supplemented visual communication. Distinct horn or trumpet calls announced various events, mealtimes, visitors according to rank, emergencies, or religious observances. Bell systems within larger castles allowed communication between distant sections of the complex. Heralds served particularly important communication functions, combining diplomatic immunity with ceremonial roles. These officials carried formal messages between lords, announced tournaments, and proclaimed important news. Their distinctive clothing made them immediately recognizable, allowing safe passage even between hostile territories. For everyday internal castle communication, a hierarchy of servants transmitted information vertically through social ranks. Chamberlains or stewards received instructions from the lord or lady, then distributed appropriate commands to lower-ranking servants. This system enabled efficient management while maintaining social distinctions crucial to medieval hierarchy. Number 4. How crowded were medieval castles? Popular depictions often show medieval castles as either nearly empty stone fortresses or impossibly crowded warrens. The reality of castle population density fell somewhere between these extremes, with remarkable fluctuations based on season, political circumstances, and the castle's primary function. A typical medium-sized castle might permanently house 40 to 80 people, with populations expanding dramatically during special circumstances. This permanent population included the lord's immediate family, personal servants, military personnel, and specialized staff like cooks and stable hands. Castle populations followed a pyramid structure, with a small number of nobility supported by a much larger servant class. Living arrangements strictly followed social hierarchies. The lord and lady occupied the best chambers, typically in the keep or other defensible central locations. Knights and higher-ranking servants received smaller private or semi-private spaces. Lower servants often lacked designated sleeping quarters entirely, instead setting up temporary bedding in halls, kitchens, or other work areas each night. Space allocation varied seasonally. During winter months, castle inhabitants concentrated in fewer rooms for enhanced heating efficiency and reduced fuel consumption. Summer allowed greater dispersal throughout the castle complex, with some activities moving outdoors. This seasonal compression and expansion created constantly shifting population densities within castle walls. Special occasions dramatically increased castle populations. During feasts, tournaments, or important political gatherings, a castle's population might triple or quadruple temporarily. These events strained resources and space, often requiring temporary structures in courtyards. Visiting nobles brought their own servants, further increasing population density during these periods. Wars and sieges created extreme population pressure within castle walls. During conflicts, surrounding villagers often sought shelter inside the castle, bringing livestock and valuables. These refugee populations could increase a castle's inhabitants tenfold, creating serious sanitation and food storage challenges. The constant movement of people created distinctive traffic patterns within castles. Servants developed elaborate systems to minimize disruption, including specific circulation paths designed to keep service activities hidden from noble spaces whenever possible. These backstage routes allowed servants to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury for their superiors. Number 3, were castle defenses really that sophisticated? The evolution of castle defenses represents one of history's most fascinating arms races, a centuries-long struggle between increasingly sophisticated offensive weapons and defensive countermeasures that shaped both architecture and military strategy. Early medieval castles relied primarily on elevation and massive walls. These simple motte and bailey designs featured wooden stockades on raised earthen mounds, offering basic protection against small raiding parties. As siege machinery advanced, castle design responded with stone construction, deeper moats, and more complex layouts. By the 12th–13th centuries, castle designers incorporated remarkably sophisticated defensive elements. Concentric castle designs featured multiple rings of walls, each higher than the outer ring, allowing defenders to fire over the heads of their own forces on lower walls. This defense-in-depth strategy meant attackers who breached the outer wall found themselves trapped in a killing zone between wall layers. Arrow loops, narrow vertical slits in walls, allowed defenders to fire while presenting minimal targets. These evolved into more sophisticated crossbow loops with wider internal openings for greater firing angles. Later castle designs incorporated specialized artillery platforms for early gunpowder weapons, demonstrating medieval engineers' adaptability to changing technology. Entrances, naturally vulnerable points, received particular defensive attention. Gatehouses evolved from simple openings to complex defensive structures with multiple portcullises, iron grates that dropped vertically, murder holes openings for dropping objects on attackers, and bent entrances forcing attackers to make difficult turns while under fire from multiple directions. Water defenses provided passive protection. Moats, water-filled ditches surrounding castles, prevented undermining, digging beneath walls, while forcing attackers to cross exposed areas. Some sophisticated designs included water gates allowing controlled boat access while maintaining defensive integrity. Psychological elements complemented physical defenses. Castles were designed to appear even more formidable than their actual defensive capabilities warranted. Tall, thin towers conveyed greater height when viewed from a distance. Crenellations, the distinctive tooth pattern atop walls, provided minimal practical protection but instantly signified military architecture, potentially deterring attacks. Perhaps most surprisingly, castle defenders sometimes employed biological warfare elements. Historical accounts describe defenders catapulting diseased animal carcasses or human corpses into besieging armies, deliberately spreading illness. While the medieval understanding of disease transmission remained limited, they recognized the devastating effect of sickness on tightly packed besieging forces. Number 2, how isolated were castle inhabitants? Popular imagination often depicts medieval castles as isolated strongholds, cut off from the outside world. The reality reveals a much more connected existence, with castles functioning as hubs within complex economic, social, and political networks. Castle location typically prioritized accessibility as much as defensibility. Many castles deliberately positioned themselves near trade routes, river crossings, or natural harbors. This strategic placement allowed them to monitor and tax trade while maintaining connections to commercial networks. Rather than seeking isolation, castle builders often selected sites maximizing their ability to control and participate in regional activities. Castle economies depended on constant interaction with surrounding communities. Even castles with substantial internal food production required specialized goods and services from towns and villages. Regular markets held in castle baileys' outer courtyards brought local producers inside castle grounds, creating economic and information exchanges. Castle inhabitants purchased everything from luxury textiles to basic foodstuffs through these market networks. Traveling merchants brought distant goods directly to castles, particularly for wealthy nobles seeking exotic items. These merchants doubled as information couriers, bringing news from distant regions. Their regular circuits connected seemingly isolated castles to broader European commercial and information networks. Religious connections further reduced isolation. Castle chapels typically fell under the jurisdiction of nearby monasteries or cathedrals, creating institutional relationships. Visits from bishops or their representatives maintained ecclesiastical connections. Castle inhabitants also undertook pilgrimages to regional and distant holy sites, temporarily leaving castle confines while broadening their geographical experience. Social obligations created regular movement between castles. Nobles maintained relationships through mutual visits, creating continuous circulation of people between seemingly isolated strongholds. Young nobles routinely left home for education in other castles or ecclesiastical institutions. Marriage arrangements connected castle families across considerable distances. The seasonal rhythm of medieval life included periods of greater isolation. Winter weather could temporarily cut off castle access, particularly in mountainous regions. However, even during these periods, castles typically maintained skeleton crews of messengers ready to depart when weather permitted, ensuring communication lines reopened at the earliest opportunity. Perhaps most surprisingly, tourism existed even in medieval times. Pilgrims and travelers sometimes visited castles with particularly impressive architecture, important relics, or historical significance. While not tourism in the modern sense, this practice created another avenue connecting castle inhabitants to the wider world. Number 1. Did medieval castle life really differ that much from ours? When we strip away the obvious technological differences, did the fundamental human experiences within castle walls truly differ from our modern lives? The answer reveals surprising parallels alongside unbridgeable differences that challenge our assumptions about progress and human nature. Social media might seem uniquely modern, yet medieval castle inhabitants maintained sophisticated social networks through different mechanisms. Reputation management, public performance of status, and information sharing through trusted connections all mirror modern social networking functions. Castle dwellers carefully cultivated their image through visible consumption, strategic generosity, and association with prestigious connections, behaviors instantly recognizable to any modern social media user. Work-life balance created tensions remarkably similar to modern complaints. Castle inhabitants struggled to balance productive labor, social obligations, religious duties, and personal needs with limited leisure time. While specific activities differed, the fundamental challenge of allocating finite time and energy across competing demands remains unchanged. Family dynamics reveal both profound differences and surprising similarities. Medieval castle families certainly operated under different assumptions about parental authority, gender roles, and childhood development. However, evidence from letters, household accounts, and legal records shows familiar emotional attachments, parental anxiety over children's futures, complex sibling relationships, and intergenerational tensions over appropriate behavior and resources. Entertainment served similar psychological functions despite technological differences. Medieval storytelling, music, and games provided escapism, social bonding, status display, and emotional catharsis, precisely the functions served by modern entertainment media. The human need for narrative, competitive play, and shared cultural experiences transcends technological platforms. Mental health challenges appear in medieval records in different language but recognizable forms. Castle inhabitants experienced depression described as melancholy, anxiety often framed as spiritual testing, and trauma responses particularly among knights who had experienced combat. While explanation frameworks differed dramatically, the underlying psychological experiences remain recognizable. Economic insecurity created stress even among castle elites. Failed harvests, political changes, or military defeats could rapidly change a castle family's fortunes. This economic precariousness generated anxiety, contingency planning, and status competition that mirrors modern financial stress, though with far fewer safety nets. Perhaps most fundamentally similar, castle inhabitants constantly navigated complex social hierarchies, seeking advancement while maintaining necessary relationships. The universal human challenges of determining who to trust, how to gain advantage without alienating allies, and balancing individual desires with community expectations remain remarkably constant despite centuries of technological and social change. Have you ever considered that despite the enormous technological and social changes since medieval times, the fundamental human experiences of seeking connection, meaning, and security might remain essentially unchanged? Would you recognize yourself in the hopes, fears, and daily struggles of those who walked those stone corridors so many centuries ago?